The grand ballroom was bathed in golden light, shimmering chandeliers reflecting off the crystal glasses held by Manhattan's elite. Emma stood at the center, her heart pounding, excitement bubbling inside her. Tonight was meant to be her fairy tale, the night Lucas would officially announce their engagement. But as murmurs swept through the crowd, she turned toward the entrance, and her world came crashing down. Lucas arrived, his hand entwined with another woman's, a smug smirk on his face as if her pain meant nothing.
Hello, I'm the storyteller of the channel, and I would like to ask for a second of your time to subscribe, activate the notification bell, and like the video so that YouTube can take our story to more people who are passionate about stories like this. Thank you, and without further ado, let's continue with our story.
The whispers turned into gasps, then laughter. This was not just heartbreak. It was humiliation on a stage too big to bear. Emma felt her knees weaken, her vision blurring as her dream life disintegrated before her eyes. Lucas didn't just betray her. He made a spectacle out of it. "I found someone better," he announced, his words sharp as daggers slicing through her pride. The emotional story of her once perfect love shattered in a single sentence. The weight of eyes upon her became unbearable, the pity in their gazes suffocating. She needed to leave, but her body refused to move, frozen by the agony of public disgrace. Was this real, or just a cruel nightmare she would soon wake from? Then came the final blow, the one that cut deeper than Lucas's betrayal. Her mother, a woman of power and prestige, stormed toward her, fury flickering in her eyes. "You had one job, Emma," she hissed, voice laced with venom. "Secure a powerful marriage. And you failed." The words crushed her last remnants of strength. Not a single word of comfort, not a single attempt to shield her from the embarrassment. Instead, she was cast aside, discarded like an inconvenience. Real stories of love gone wrong didn't always end with a second chance. Sometimes they just ended. With nothing left to hold on to, Emma fled the ballroom, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses mocking her pain. The cold air outside hit her face like reality itself, merciless and indifferent. Her designer heels clattered against the pavement as she walked aimlessly through the streets of Manhattan, her once glamorous life unraveling with every step. The city, always vibrant and alive, felt distant, foreign, as if she no longer belonged. Was this rock bottom, or was there still further to fall? The glittering skyscrapers around her, once a symbol of her privilege, now felt like prison walls. Every face she passed seemed to judge her. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about her downfall. This was not just a bad night. It was the unraveling of everything she thought she was. She had been Emma Sinclair, the poised heiress, the sought-after bride-to-be. Now she was just lost, a woman without a name, without a home, without a future. A real story of what happens when the rug is pulled from beneath someone's feet. Her hands trembled as she wiped away the mascara-streaked tears. What now? Go back home to a family that had already discarded her? Run to a friend who would only remind her of the life she had just lost? No, she had no one. Nothing. She was starting over, whether she wanted to or not. And as the city roared around her, Emma realized one thing. This was her new beginning. A painful, unwanted beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The neon glow of a nearby bar flickered in the distance, its dim lighting offering a strange sense of refuge. Maybe a drink would dull the ache, at least for tonight. Maybe, just for a moment, she could forget. With a deep breath, she stepped inside, unaware that her life was about to take a turn she could have never imagined. The bar was dimly lit, the scent of whiskey and regret thick in the air. Emma slumped onto a stool, her fingers tightening around the cold glass of bourbon the bartender slid toward her. She wasn't a drinker, at least not until tonight. The world she knew had shattered, and drowning in alcohol seemed as good an escape as any. She barely noticed the man sitting a few stools away, his eyes lingering on her a little longer than a stranger should. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, nothing like the chaos inside her. "Rough night?" he asked, his lips curling into something between a smirk and sympathy. She scoffed, taking another sip before answering. "More like a rough life." There was no point in hiding her misery. She had no reputation left to protect. The man introduced himself as Noah, and unlike the polished, suit-clad men she was used to, there was something raw about him. No pretense, no arrogance, just quiet confidence. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the way his presence felt oddly grounding, but she found herself talking. She told him everything: the betrayal, the humiliation, the mother who saw her as nothing more than a failed investment. And instead of pitying her, he simply listened. A few drinks later, their laughter filled the space between them. It was ridiculous. Really, one moment, she was drowning in despair, and the next, she was entertaining the insane idea of marrying a man she had just met. "Why not?" he shrugged, grinning. "You've already lost everything. What's one more reckless decision?" She laughed, but something about the idea felt freeing. What did she have to lose? A prestigious last name that meant nothing anymore? A future that had already crumbled? Maybe this was her chance to rewrite her own real story. "Fine," she slurred. "Let's do it." And just like that, they found themselves standing in front of a weary-eyed officiant at a 24-hour chapel. The absurdity of the moment lost in a haze of alcohol and adrenaline. Noah held her hands, his grip firm, steady, so different from the cold, calculated way Lucas had once touched her. The words, "I do," left her lips before she even processed them. And suddenly, she was no longer Emma Sinclair, the heartbroken socialite. She was Emma Westwood, the wife of a complete stranger. A real emotional story unfolding in the most unexpected way. The next morning, reality hit like a freight train. The unfamiliar ceiling, the scratchy sheets, the distant sound of a leaky faucet. Nothing about this place screamed luxury. She sat up abruptly, her head pounding. Noah stirred beside her, his arm draped lazily across his chest, completely at ease. The wedding dress she had worn last night was now crumpled in the corner, the absurdity of it all sinking in. She was married, to a man she barely knew. And worse, she had no way to undo it. "Noah," she whispered, as if saying his name would make him disappear. He groaned, cracking one eye open before smirking. "Good morning, wife." The word sent a shiver down her spine. Wife. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't even know where she was. Panic crept in. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "Home," he replied casually. Except it wasn't home. It was a tiny apartment, far from the grand penthouses she had been raised in. No staff, no silk sheets, no endless closets of designer clothes. Just four walls and a man who seemed entirely too comfortable with their insane situation. Emma wanted to scream, to demand answers, to undo the biggest mistake of her life. But deep down, something told her this was exactly where she needed to be. As crazy as it was, as reckless as it seemed, she wasn't just running away from her past anymore. She was stepping into something entirely new, something unknown, and whether she liked it or not, her real story was just getting started. Emma's new reality hit her harder than any betrayal ever could. The penthouses, designer wardrobes, and extravagant dinners were gone. In their place, a tiny, cluttered apartment with mismatched furniture and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. She stood in the middle of it all, arms crossed, refusing to sit on the old couch Noah seemed perfectly content with. "This isn't real," she muttered under her breath. But it was. There was no maid to prepare her coffee, no assistant to handle her schedule. For the first time in her life, Emma had to exist without privilege. The first disaster struck in the kitchen. Determined to reclaim a shred of control, she decided to cook breakfast. How hard could it be? Eggs, toast, simple. But as smoke billowed from the pan and the fire alarm shrieked, she realized just how unprepared she was for this life. Noah rushed in, amused rather than alarmed, and quickly turned off the stove. We could just eat cereal," he chuckled, waving away the smoke. Emma scowled, embarrassed but unwilling to admit defeat. She wasn't just learning how to cook, She was learning how to survive without the crutch of wealth. Grocery shopping was another nightmare. She stood in the aisle, staring at the rows of price tags, realizing she had never once needed to check them before. "Why is this so expensive?" she groaned, picking up a carton of organic milk. Noah smirked. "Welcome to reality, princess." She shot him a glare, but there was no venom behind it. Frustration, maybe, a touch of humiliation, but also something new, an odd sense of curiosity about this world she had never truly lived in. Real stories of struggle weren't just things she read about. Now, she was living one. Despite her resistance, something shifted in her. Late nights spent on the worn-out couch turned into easy conversations. Noah had a way of making the ordinary feel warm, safe. She found herself laughing at his jokes, leaning into his presence, drawn to the simplicity of it all. There were no extravagant dates, no grand gestures, just shared meals, movie nights, and long walks in the cool evening air. Somewhere in the quiet moments, in the messy, unscripted days, she realized she wasn't just adapting. She was changing. Noah saw the world differently. He wasn't concerned with social status or wealth. He found joy in the little things, sunsets, good music, the way a perfectly made sandwich could brighten a day. Emma had spent her life chasing luxury, yet here she was captivated by a man who valued things she had once overlooked. And worse, she was starting to see the beauty in them too. She no longer longed for the cold marble halls of her past life. She longed for these moments, the ones that felt real. But just as she began to settle into this new version of herself, she noticed things about Noah that didn't add up. His taste in wine was too refined for a man who lived so simply. He spoke about business with the kind of insight only someone raised in power would know. And then there were the glances, the way he hesitated when she asked about his past, as if he was hiding something. Her instincts, sharpened by years of navigating Manhattan's social elite, whispered that there was more to Noah than he let on. One night, curiosity got the best of her. While he slept, she searched his drawers, her fingers trembling as they flipped through old papers. And then she saw it, an old newspaper article with a familiar face staring back at her. Her heart pounded. Noah wasn't just an ordinary man. He wasn't a nobody. He was someone she should have recognized all along. And now, she needed to know the truth. Emma's breath caught as she stared at the newspaper in her hands. The headline read, "Noah Alexander Westwood, billionaire heir disappears without a trace." Her mind raced, struggling to connect the man sleeping in the next room with the polished, suit-clad figure in the article. This wasn't possible. Noah, her Noah, was supposed to be an ordinary man, someone far removed from the world she had left behind. But now, everything she thought she knew about him shattered. Her stomach twisted. Had he been playing her this whole time? She stormed into the bedroom, gripping the newspaper tightly. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. Noah sat up, rubbing his eyes, before his gaze landed on the paper in her hands. For a moment, he said nothing, just exhaled slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "I can explain," he finally said, swinging his legs over the bed. But Emma wasn't ready for explanations. "You lied to me," she shot back. "This whole time, you let me think you were just some regular guy. You let me believe I wasn't marrying into money again." Noah ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering in his expression. "I didn't lie," he said carefully. "I just didn't tell you." Emma let out a sharp laugh, disbelief washing over her. That's the same thing. Her mind reeled back to every moment they had shared. The cheap dinners, the tiny apartment, the struggles with money. Had it all been an act? A test? Had he been watching her, waiting to see if she was like everyone else, just another person drawn to his wealth? The emotional story she thought she was living suddenly felt like a cruel joke. "I left that life behind," Noah continued, his voice softer now. "I walked away from all of it because I was tired of people loving the idea of me instead of the real me. I wanted to live without the weight of expectations, without people using me for what I had." His eyes met hers, searching for understanding. "And then I met you. And for the first time, someone saw me. Not my money, not my last name. Just me. Emma's heart clenched. She wanted to hold on her anger, but a part of her, an inconvenient, deeply human part, understood. Hadn't she been running from the same thing? She turned away, her thoughts a tangled mess. "So what now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you expecting me to just accept this?" She wasn't sure which hurt more, the fact that he had kept this secret, or the realization that she had fallen in love with him before knowing who he truly was. Noah stood, closing the distance between them. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just want you to know that my feelings for you are real. No money, no titles, just us." Emma's walls, the one she had been carefully rebuilding, cracked. Wasn't this what she had always wanted? A love that wasn't tied to wealth, a connection that existed beyond social expectations? And yet, the weight of his secret still lingered. Real stories didn't always have easy answers. Sometimes, love was complicated. Sometimes, it tested everything you thought you knew about yourself. And now, standing before Noah, she had to make a choice: hold on to her fear, or take a leap of faith. But before she could speak, Noah reached into his pocket, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he knelt before her, pulling out a small velvet box. "I know this isn't how you imagined it," he said, his voice steady. "But I don't want our story to be built on a lie. So, I'm asking you now, with nothing hidden, will you marry me again? Not as Noah, the stranger you met in a bar, but as Noah Westwood, the man who loves you." Emma's heart pounded. This time, the choice was hers. Emma stared at the ring in Noah's hand, her heart pounding louder than the silence between them. This wasn't just a proposal, it was a crossroads. Every instinct told her to run, to protect herself from another betrayal, another disappointment. But hadn't she spent her whole life building walls only to realize that love, real love, didn't thrive behind them? Noah wasn't Lucas. He wasn't her mother. He wasn't the world that had judged her, discarded her. He was the man who had seen her at her lowest and never once looked away. A part of her had already made the decision before she even opened her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for his hands, steadying her own trembling fingers. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But on one condition." Noah raised an eyebrow, waiting. "No more secrets," she continued. "If we do this, we do it right. We build something real." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a slow, relieved smile spreading across his face. "No more secrets," he promised. And this time, when he slipped the ring on her finger, it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything they had survived and everything they were about to build together. The wedding wasn't a grand affair, no gilded ballrooms or extravagant guest lists. Instead, it was intimate, raw, and completely theirs. Emma wore a simple white dress, barefoot on the sand, her hands clasped in Noah's as they exchanged vows beneath the setting sun. There were no paparazzi, no gossip columns speculating on their love. Just two people who had walked through fire and chosen each other anyway. A real story, not the kind written for headlines, but the kind that mattered. The kind that lasted. But Emma wasn't content with just her own happiness. She knew what it felt like to be lost, to be discarded, to have no place to turn. And she also knew that her story wasn't unique. There were so many women out there, abandoned, broken, left to pick up the pieces alone. Together, she and Noah used their resources to create something bigger than themselves, a foundation dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives. What had once been her deepest wound became her greatest purpose. Pain, when given the right meaning, could transform into something powerful. Months turned into years, and Emma no longer recognized the girl who once measured her worth by status and wealth. She had found something greater than all of that: love, not just with Noah, but for life itself. The mansion she had once dreamed of no longer felt like a necessity. The luxury she once clung to felt hollow compared to the simple joy of waking up beside the man she loved. The emotional story she had lived through had changed her, reshaped her. And for the first time, she wouldn't change a thing. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their home, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and love, Noah took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice soft in the cool night air. Emma turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet certainty. "Not for a second," she said, "because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters." And so, Emma's story wasn't just about betrayal, heartbreak, or wealth lost and found. It was about love, the kind that survives, that rebuilds, that transforms. It was a real story of second chances, of choosing love over fear, of rewriting destiny on her own terms. And as she leaned into Noah's embrace, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.